session with the 150 congressmen and congresswomen. And there he answered questions about his policies and how he intends to implement them. When the meeting was over, there was a strong showing of bipartisan support from those who had been here, and Democratic leaders warned that the American public should be ready to be in for the long haul in the Gulf.
I think it's very important that there not be any expectation on the part of people that a policy of economic sanctions is going to work overnight. To suggest that to start getting now into other types of options, will that become necessary, it seems to me to divert from the central premise of the policy.
The president was urged by members of Congress to seek help from America's allies in Europe and the Japanese in helping to defray the expense of the Persian Gulf buildup, and he said steps to do that were already underway. Charles?
Thank you, Eric. Eric Engberg at the White House. Let's go back to Hetty.
Well, Charlie, the White House position has been all along that Saddam Hussein was not a man to be trusted on any of the pledges that he has been making about hostages, and that, as one State Department official said a couple of days ago, we'll believe it when we see it. So it would be wrong, I guess, to say that the United States government expressed disappointment over the failure to let the women and children start leaving, because there has always been some suspicion that there might be some trouble in arranging the final release of these people. However, the State Department spokesman, Margaret Tutwiler, said yesterday that if the women and the children would be released, the United States would take the position this was a significant step in the right direction. Well, needless to say, that significant step has not occurred, but nobody in official Washington is surprised by it. As for Dan Rather's interview last night with the Iraqi leader, it provided nothing but support for the Bush administration position that they've been selling all over Washington this week, and that is that we are dealing with a difficult, wily leader who is not going to back up an inch more than he is pushed, and that the United States and its allies in the Persian Gulf conflict had better be prepared for a long confrontation. Saddam Hussein showing himself to be a man who would not be easily moved from his position, and stating that the diplomatic track along which the United States had been hoping to get some action this week is not one that he is going to be moved to until the sanctions start to bite, at least.
Thank you, Eric. Eric Engberg at the White House.
Famous.
Eric Engberg reports.
Statement
in the wake of statements by Saddam Hussein that he will never relinquish Kuwait, President Bush was asked at his news conference how long the U.S. is willing to keep up its economic and military pressure.
It'll go on as long as it takes to have these United Nations sanctions fully implemented, and I'm glad that these diplomatic efforts are taking place. Perhaps one will hit pay dirt, but as of now, I must say I'm not optimistic.
The president said his determination is unaffected by the scores of hostages Iraq claims it has moved to military targets.
I will not change the policy of the United States, and I don't think other leaders whose foreign nationals are in the same predicament will change their policies to pay homage or to give credibility to this brutal move of staking out citizens and a brutal move of holding people against their will.
After the news conference was over, the president got onto Air Force One and came back up to Maine to resume his vacation. He plans to stay here until Monday, then go back, the vacation over. Charles?
Thank you, Eric. Eric Engberg at Kennebunkport.
A simple one, pack. That we're not ready to announce today that the president has a meeting scheduled with the Soviet leader, but it's very likely that that kind of an announcement will be coming within a matter of hours or days. He did nothing to dampen the speculation that such a set of talks was going to be held soon. In fact, he did everything, including that laugh at the end when Marlin Fitzwater handed him the note saying, "Stay tuned for further developments." I thought that was the most eloquent thing that was said in this briefing, that there are going to be further developments, and they're probably going to be sooner rather than later. I think that the point here is that When two countries, especially two superpowers, have agreed to a meeting, there are always protocol demands that they announce the meeting at the same time. So the United States cannot unilaterally say right now that it has, in fact, set a deal, set a meeting with the Soviets. That will have to be announced simultaneously, and it's obvious that something is in the wind there and that the two sides will probably be announcing something soon. On the other side of this, I think that it's worthwhile to point out here that this is bad news for Saddam Hussein. If the United States can hold on to its close working relationship with the Soviets in the Gulf crisis, that will enable the United States and the Soviet Union and the other powers that are arrayed against Iraq to put the real squeeze on the Iraqi government. Bob?
I think that's quite true, Eric. And if I understood that little back and forth between Scowcroft and Marlin Fitzwater, the press secretary, apparently Fitzwater was saying there is going to be some kind of an announcement coming out of the State Department or from Kenny Bunkport at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Am I right about that?
Well, he handed the general a note when Scowcroft was asked the question, are the newspapers and the wire services that have speculated on a summit, are they wrong? Scowcroft refused to say that they were wrong. And at that point, Marlin Fitzwater, the very clever and sagacious White House press secretary, handed him a note that said, stay tuned, another announcement at 1 o'clock. From the way this was done, Bob, and knowing the way these briefings operate, I couldn't tell whether Marlin was trying to make a little inside joke with the White House press corps or whether there, in fact, will be a meeting at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I tend to doubt that there will be an announcement at 1 because I don't know, unless they've made an arrangement with the Soviets that the two countries will announce it simultaneously at 1 o'clock, and that's always possible. But I would offer the same advice as Marlin Fitzwater. Stay tuned. There's something in the wind, and it's probably going to be announced sooner rather than later.
One other question, Eric. Is the president about this morning?
The president is about, in fact, he's out in his runabout cigarette boat this morning, and he was on the phone, I know, to General Scowcroft prior to this briefing, giving him rather specific instructions about what he wanted him to say. So the president, as he would put it, is out recreating today, out on the waters of the Atlantic. He's only got 1 day left in this vacation.
All right, Eric Engberg. A couple of other developments. The UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar is Russia and Soviet leader Gorbachev have decided to meet next weekend to discuss the crisis in the Persian Gulf and other matters. They'll hold a one-day summit next Sunday in Helsinki, Finland. Eric Engberg is at the president's vacation compound in Kenny Bunkport, Maine, and has details.
President Bush took time away from his vacation, even putting on a tie to announce the summit that he's been urging on Gorbachev for a week. While it's to be an open agenda, events in the Middle East have already determined topic A.
There is no special agenda relating to the Middle East. Nobody's doing any negotiating or anything of that nature.
American officials see the summit as another way to show Saddam Hussein that he is isolated even from his former backers in Moscow, who've endorsed the UN blockade against him.
I'm very pleased, as I think I said before publicly, that we seem to be in general agreement on a lot of issues, a lot of questions that relate to the Middle East.
American officials say that Mr. Bush wants to express his personal thanks to Gorbachev at the one-day summit. The final arrangements were set this morning, even as National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft was doing his best to stay mum about the secret. Then White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater handed Scowcroft a message, phoned to the press room by the president himself.
Well,
the summit was on.
Stay tuned. We'll have an announcement at 1 o'clock.
Making that 1 o'clock announcement, the president was asked about continued Iraqi delays in freeing foreign women and children who've been promised they can go home.
I don't like it. I don't think the world likes it. I'm glad when any American comes out of there, but there's a certain brutality, certain tawdry performance in all of this.
The president was so eager to have this summit with the Soviet Union that he even okayed holding it in Helsinki, Finland, right next door to the Soviet Union, because that was the place that was most convenient for Gorbachev. Bob?
Eric, what do you think are the subjects that will actually come up at this summit?
Well, the Soviet Union has been generally supportive of the UN and U.S. position against Saddam Hussein, but in the last week there have been some rumblings of discontent from Moscow. One of the things that the Russians are concerned about is that the American defense against a possible invasion of Saudi Arabia has given the United States military a strong position in Saudi Arabia that it didn't have before. And I think Gorbachev will be looking for some guarantees from the United States that the U.S. officials do not intend to keep that as a permanent situation.
Okay, thank you, Eric. The Soviets, as Eric says, have condemned Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait and have stood with the United States in support of the economic sanctions. But even so, there's been some sign of nervousness in Moscow over these past weeks, that the size of the military buildup, as Eric says, is on the Soviet mind. So we have more on that now from Barry Peterson in Moscow.
The world was the lure this summer for a small group of American scientists. Eric Engberg followed them to the far north of Russia.
Siberia is as wild and forbidding as any spot on Earth. That's where Stalin sent enemies to disappear. But now, in one of the zanier triumphs of glasnost, Americans are landing in southern Siberia, carrying fishing rods.
It's only been recently that we've been able to get in here and do some fishing with our Russian friends.
Bill Flynn, aquarium director by trade, has obtained Soviet permission to capture game fish unknown outside Siberia.
We'd like to build and will build an exhibit representing the Siberian rivers.
The American expedition wants to reel in a few big ones for study. Mainly, they want a taimen. But little fish, youngsters that can be boxed up and taken home alive, are the chief quarry. If these finny emigres can survive the trip to America, they'll be stars of the new Tennessee aquarium Flynn is building in Chattanooga.
We're burning up our quota with 7 on each and every species.
Even if we release them?
Yes, it's counted as a catch. Well, that's the rule.
Flynn's team, angler law professor Tom Earnhardt and biologist Jim Rice, have brought abundant equipment and confidence to Siberia, but they face heavy pressures. Time for one. The Soviets have given them just 4 days on this tributary of the Yenisei River. Worse, it becomes clear at the outset that the American visitors and Soviet hosts are split by misunderstandings deeper than the Yenisei.
We can't find them, and they don't know where they are. They're somewhere. They weren't born big.
The expedition had been told big-name professors from the Soviet Academy of Biological Sciences would lead the way to the fish. Instead, they find local game wardens. The Americans, in the tradition of Ahab, are obsessed by one gigantic fish.
First one, taimen.
No, it isn't. The taimen of Siberia is a real Mr. T, growing to 200 pounds, the largest trout in the world.
Okay, that's a lennox.
That's a lennox. All right, I thought it was a taimen. You sure it's a lennox? Well, then it's a lennox.
Only after frustrating days of beating the Siberian water with every lure known to man have the Americans come to grips with a central fact about the taimen. Not only is it a very large fish, it is also a very rare fish.
They have hooked and lost 2 big ones.
He bit it on both sides and spit it out. Came about that far out of the water. Most of it was his head. Honest to God. And
So we know there is such a fish.
oh, they're here.
More distressing, they have not even seen any small ones of any of the exotic species they came for. They try everything.
Let's start getting geared up.
Including electric shockers.
Yeah, all minnows. Minnows. Damn, still minnows. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised.
He has only 2 days left.
Eric Engberg, CBS News on the Yenisei River.
Summer on the trail of the world's biggest trout. Well, last night we saw some of the problems they found, and tonight Eric Engberg has part 2 of the story.
The intrepid explorers from the Tennessee Aquarium, halfway through their allotted time in Siberia, still haven't captured the giant taimen or any of the other exotic fish they came to collect. Enter Georgi Rukasuya, chief game warden for this area. He knows the river, knows the taimen.
Johnny? All right, good.
Let me see her.
All right. What's the timing?
At last, they have hauled in Mr. T, the taimen, king of the salmon and trout family.
Look at the tail on that.
Oh,
Isn't
boy.
that gorgeous, Bill?
That's fantastic. Good for you, boy. Good for you. He told us to come here.
Now, expedition leader Bill Flynn has a choice. This taimen, too large to transport to America, would be an ideal specimen to cut up for study. He can't do it.
I'd like to turn her loose.
The taimen, Flynn decides, is too rare and too beautiful to kill.
I'm going to turn her loose.
There she
Okay,
goes.
there she goes. She's fine.
She's fine.
Georgi and Bill, one Russian, one American, are now a team. Now, Georgi solves the Americans' major problem, going off on his own at night to collect small members of 2 key species, the lennox and the grayling, to bring to the U.S.
What do you have, Tom? Lennox, 2 gorgeous lennox, about 6 inches long. Thank you, thank you. Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое.
So we've had a positive turnaround, and very quickly, thanks to our Russian compadre.
This Russian Daniel Boone is a committed environmentalist.
There are very few rivers like this one in the whole of the country, moreover in the world. And everything is beautiful here.
Beautiful and threatened. The taimen have been depleted by commercial netting. While netting is now banned, clear cutting in the virgin forests is lowering the river's levels, endangering the fish. There is no rest for Bill Flynn. He has 27 fish to bring home. He'll be lucky if half survive the trip.
Put that small lennox. There's 2 lennox right there. All right, put one in one box. Yep.
Flynn has used every trick in his book, including tranquilizers in the water, to give his precious cargo a chance.
This is beautiful. It's going right in the water.
They will be kept at the National Aquarium in Baltimore until their permanent home in Tennessee is built.
Yeah, this is the test box. These fish have been in for almost 200 hours now. God, they're still alive.
In a triumph of science and Siberian toughness, all 27 fish survived the rigors of transatlantic travel. There are no taimen, not yet. But the Americans now have a friend in Siberia who hopes one day to send them fish after he creates a hatchery that will help save the species. Georgi is the future. Eric Engberg, CBS News on the Yenisei River.
And that's the news. I'm Bob Schieffer in New York, sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Americans out, hundreds more are being left behind, though, without much hope of leaving soon. Eric Engberg reports.
The U.S.-sponsored evacuation of American nationals from Kuwait and Baghdad was delayed for several hours tonight, forcing evacuees in Baghdad to wait nervously at the U.S. Embassy. Finally, word that the plane was on its way sent them to the airport for the trip to London. Part of the delay was caused by Iraq's unexplained closing of the Kuwait airport, which forced evacuees to endure a long bus trip. Then U.S. officials complained Iraqi officials caused several hours more delay by interrogating some evacuees, all women, children, and Arabic men, and challenging their right to leave. The evacuation flight, probably the last run by the government, leaves an estimated 600 to 700 Americans still in hiding in Kuwait and about 180 in Iraq who've been told they can't leave. For Ray Herod, one of 24 Americans who have taken refuge in U.S. diplomatic quarters, today's evacuation evokes bittersweet emotions.
Of course, I'm happy for them to get to go, but I of course would like to be on the plane with them. I am not on vacation here. I would like to go home.
Unlike the American hostages, these carpenters from Northern Ireland at least have jobs to keep them busy. Hired to renovate Saddam Hussein's new offices, they have been told they'll be here until the job is done. For them, like the others, occasional mail must substitute for human milestones missed at home. A birthday, a 5-year-old daughter's first day at school.
It's a long, long way to Tipperary.
The words of the old English drinking song have taken on a sad meaning for foreigners caught in the middle of the Gulf crisis, as it sinks in that it could be a long, long way before they see home again. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Baghdad.
Israel.
Explosive element to the crisis in the Persian Gulf and strained the U.S. alliance with leading Arab states. This comes just as economic sanctions are starting to have at least some effect in Iraq. Eric Engberg is in Baghdad.
The pinch of the embargo has hit Baghdad where people feel it. Cigarettes in short supply, auto parts unavailable, food prices soaring. Iraq's dictator Saddam Hussein has countered with his gamble that he can pick apart the U.S.-led coalition one country at a time. In this game, Mideast experts say, he has many diplomatic cards left to play and is nowhere close to folding. Daily, Iraq's state-run press scoffs at American staying power, citing everything from Vietnam to desert sand. Beyond words, Baghdad has human beings to trade in, and does. French hostages were released to encourage France to loosen the embargo. CBS News has learned of a new refinement in this gambit. Iraq has offered several Western countries a deal. Hostages from those countries will be released if the governments will send groups of prominent politicians and pacifists to meet with Iraqi leaders. Through such diplomatic gray mail, Western analysts say, Iraq hopes to nurture anti-war movements and spread dissension inside those countries. Even Greenpeace, the environmental group, has been invited just because it has the word peace in its name. Saddam Hussein's strongest card, according to Western diplomats, is his claim to be fighting in the name of Arab unity against Israel. Some Western analysts are worried that as the pressure on Saddam builds, he will stage elections in Kuwait, install a puppet government, then grandly offer Kuwait as a home for Palestinians. As he plays his cards, Saddam is betting he will split the UN coalition before the embargo strangles his country. As the embargo takes hold, the price of chicken has tripled, and smaller seed potatoes are being rushed to market, wiping out next year's crop. Iraq's industries and power plants, analysts say, can be shut down quickly. The country relied on imports even for basic machine parts. Its engineers lack the basic skills to fill the gap. But Saddam Hussein has allowed his people to suffer for long periods before. There is a chilling streak of martyr and mystic in him that raises concerns he will not compromise. One observer says that when a recent visitor warned him that his country faced disaster, Saddam's only response was to shrug and say, "We are already dead." Eric Engberg, CBS News, Baghdad.
The U.S. appealing for the world's sympathy today, and Eric Engberg has that.
In a television